Yeah, so when you stop sharing, I will begin sharing. All right, I hope all of you can see my screen properly. So I'm going to talk about some changes coming for query builders and its new UI components. And the agenda is go through why we're showing this, and then go looking back at the segment component that is very often used in query builders. And that is also basically what's going to be the focus for this presentation. There are more changes coming to query builders, but we're starting small. So why are we showing this? Yeah, so since the query builder is like such a central part of the Grafana experience, it's both for explore and panel edit, it's like the main thing almost. And so it will impact all users basically. And so to get the best possible query builders made, we want community input on it. As I said before, we can take small steps and look at some of the components that are a bit problematic, and then hopefully make bigger changes in the future. So just to show what I'm talking about, it's the area here in panel edit, which is the query builder, where you can see where you create the queries using this sort of UI rather than just typing the code. Yes, so here you can see the segment components. So this goes back to the early days of Grafana. So when Grafana basically was Kibana for graphite, this query builder was built. And it's quite logical. You just build like adding segments in a row and picking options. And in the end, you will get your metric, and it will basically translate directly over to code, looking almost identical. And of course, then for graphite, this was ideal, but with more data sources being added, things became more complicated, and more functionality was added to the segments. And now you sort of had these key value constructions where you had like a key and a value. And you also had these more like functions and all different kind of things being made with this component. And that is basically where we are at today. So we do a mix with this component and with regular inputs when we build the query builders. So the problems we need to solve. So one issue is, as you can see here, that the label and the segment component look very similar. Here's just a color that differs them, and this is sort of right line and has some more space on the side. In some data sources, this is also white instead of blue. So that is one of the issues we want to solve. And another one is how these behave, because you can't really see it on them, the expected behavior. So for instance, some of them you can actually edit inside of them. Some of them, when you click a part of it, you open a drop down. And some, when you click the whole thing, you open a drop down. And when you're going to remove it, some you click on the area of it, and then you can get the tooltip to remove it. And others have this remove in the actual drop down, and some you don't actually can remove. So the idea originally with the segment component was you were not going to remove it. You basically started over if you wanted to make changes. Because you always wanted like have the full row of segments to get your metric. But now when you sort of add them as filters or group bys, things becomes way more complicated. So looking then at our proposed solutions. So one thing is that the segment component will stay, but only be used in cases where it makes sense, as with the graphite case. And some other data sources work similarly. But we'll also create a new set of components, and those will be very clear with how you interact with them, and also have like an indication where you can click and remove them. They will also have a clear use case. So you will have one for key value, and one for functions, and one when you just have one single value, for instance. So you will have, and this will be spelled out clearly for the components. So this will also make it easier for plugin creators. We will also introduce top labels to sort of differentiate them from the components more clearly, and also align it with current form styles we have in other parts of Grafana. And hopefully this will also make the queries easier to scan. And it also makes it a lot easier to make them responsive. So what will they look like? So this is one of them, and it's pretty clear that the ones that look like our inputs do in other forms that have the input background are the ones that you can interact with. So in this case, you can change the key, and you can also change the value, and you also have this delete button that will remove it. And each of these are also highlighted on Hoover. The equal here is not interactable and uses the disabled background. And here you have then some of the examples of them. So the key value pairings you have here, one with fixed, just equal like as, or one where you can change that. And for certain data sources, for certain user groups, we might use words instead of these equals, because of course the user has to know what these things mean. So these will look differently depending on data source. So the user is familiar with the data source, understands what's going on. And you can also use this for like multi-selects, where you have multiple options, values for a key. We also have this one for function, where it's not like a key value pairing, but rather you have parameters that you add to a function. These are two designs we're looking at. This is nice, but if it's not enough self-explanatory, we will probably use something like this, where you actually see the parentheses. And now I'm just going to share what it might look like for InfluxDB, for instance. So here you can see some things has changed. We have a subheader we are looking into introducing, but it's still quite early exploration. But basically doing some of the settings here, where you can sort of pick metrics or logs in InfluxDB's case. If you want builder or code, you can also have certain options hidden. And it's a very common case where you get your metric, but then you have all of these other options you don't even use, and they just take up space in the query builder. So having the option to sort of hide things. And here you also can see then that we have added labels on top instead, and also have a more intuitive labeling. So here we have database for the database rather than where, and then you also have filters and fields. So this is how it would work. You would click here, and then I would pick CPU, and then I will have an option of changing these. So I can change it like that, and then I will pick one of these. So that is basically the difference from before. And here I can then also click here and simply remove it. So everything is quite clear how they work. And for a function, it's similar. You just open here, and I will pick this one, and then I already have like a value and stuff. And that is what I had to show you. So now I would love some feedback, questions, complaints, anything you got.
So I can start. I was curious, if you've thought about, now you're only showing one field, but many users, they have several, filters. And how do you imagine, will it just float from one line to the next, or could you show some example of when you have like 3 or more filters, for example, in this case?
Yeah, I can show you. So this is always, sorry. So this is an example for Flux, where you would have filters, and you would have, and these filters can also have multiple values. So here you can see they will just float next to each other. In certain cases, as with influx, you might have this situation where where you have multiple, but they also are sort of, you have the option of and or. This might change into a drop-down rather. And this is sort of a especially interesting case, and I would love you to hear people's thoughts on this, because these situations, it creates more complicated queries when you, for instance, combine and use both and or. So in influx, for instance, you could use something and or something and so forth. So that those situations becomes more tricky, I would say. As in, if you would have these sort of cases where you have multiple, like 2 ors and do like this. So this might actually be a case that exists where you have two, like a set of ors and a set of 2 sets of ors, and you can pick like one of them. So, or rather, you have something and something, or something and something. It depends a bit. But this is basically, depending on situation, you will have this and an or option between them, or they will just float next to each other. Does that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so when I look at these, it looks very much like, I can almost see the actual code expression, but we've changed some of the tokens from that expression into actual UI controls.
Yeah.
Did you look at, I honestly don't know what that would look like, but it's something that is like on a more higher level, or did you explore other more graphical paradigms rather than simply, I know it's not simply, but replacing each token in the expression for a component, so to say?
No, I mean, so my work so far has mostly looked at what's actually used now, and so sort of say like, okay, what can we do this moment? So if I understand you correctly, it's more how you would have them, how they relate to each other.
Yeah, I guess my question is like the future, but you make a good point that this is to address some of the issues with the current segment component. It's not trying to reinvent the query editor.
No, it's basically creating components that to be used for situations where the segment component is not working in the current implementation.
Okay.
So that is basically the current scope. But I mean, this is going to be like an ongoing project, definitely.
So if anyone has any feedback on this, is there any way they can, let you know after this? For those who are watching this on YouTube, is there an issue they can look at, or is there any way that you can provide that feedback after this call is over?
I mean, you can always ping me on Grafana public Slack, the community Slack, basically at Patrick, and or that would probably be the best way, I would say. There's no issue created for this yet.
It's that early, huh?
It's that early, yeah. But hopefully, things will start to become created quite soon, and so forth. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Well, it looks really good to me. I definitely am curious to start using this as a plugin author. I personally struggle a little bit with the segment component that's there today, so I'm really looking forward to this new one.
What is the main struggle for you, Marcus?
It's mostly actually what Patrick has already highlighted, that no clear way of removing. For example, there's no it behaves a little differently from data source to data source. Also, I feel like I sometimes have a difficult time figuring out how to map my expression to these segments, because I'm actually thinking about the code expression. How would I write this as a query? Usually what I send to the data source is code, and I need to go through this process of trying to translate that into a graphical representation. And I've struggled to do that with the segment. So I think I've kind of used other tools, like radio button and drop downs and text fields to because I think they're simpler. And yeah.
Is there something else that could help you in terms of thinking from like how that query would look like in code, how to translate this into this interface? Is there anything else apart from what Patrick's showed that could actually help you in a way to make this transition from thinking in terms of code into and translating that into interface?
I think it's a tricky challenge, because it kind of depends on the query language of that data source, and if you have a graph database that you're querying, that will probably look different from if you have something like a SQL database. They might require like very different graphical editors. So I guess a challenge here is that we're looking for something that works for many of them. And for a plugin author, at least for me, the biggest challenge is to, I actually need to do the work to translate this into how a graphical representation would look like. And I'd love a rich UI library so I can pick the one that makes more sense.
Yeah, so that is sort of my vision for this, is that elements will sort of within the same sort of visual style be added to this library. So you get these even more difficult cases that they actually get the components. So this sort of makes sense, because I think that's have been the whole big challenge, is that, as you're saying, you use a segment component or a regular drop down or input just to sort of get things to work. And then in many cases, I think the segment components feels a bit hacked, that people are sort of, I needed to do this, so then they add that sort of functionality to it, but then it doesn't really necessarily make sense for the user when they're using it.
Like one nice thing about the current segment component is that it makes it rather compact. You know, you can write something,
Yes.
and it doesn't take up that much space in your query editor. And I guess my first impression here is that it takes up more space. This component is more spacious. So I'd be curious to see how it would scale with, especially, you know, maybe smaller screens, someone looking at their laptop, and it's a limited area. If it just flows freely, it might become very tricky to see it.
Yeah, I think that is sort of has been the challenge from the beginning, is that, I mean, the segment component looks the way it looks for a reason, but that's, as you said, it's pretty compact. But so yeah, so this needs to be sort of tried out with data sources and see also, I mean, how many filters do you add when you do a query, and how many group bys and so forth. So it makes sense.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, no other questions or suggestions? Suggestions would be great if there's anything that looks like an issue here. Yeah, I said one final thing. These will also have these functionalities that the segment control has, that you will be able to, I mean, if you have 100 values, you will be able to search for that in the input and so forth for the selects. Yeah, so those things are not changing. All right, then I will, if there's no one else who has any comments, I will stop sharing.
I guess that means that I am up. So hi everyone, I'm Amy, product designer, working on some improvements to how we navigate within Grafana. And in particular, the thing that I'm going to be sharing today is around folder management and how we sort of manage content and folders and all that kind of goes into that. So, you know, I would say as a whole, you know, folders are very helpful, but there are definitely some limitations in our current design of folders today. So for example, when you first head into the manage area, and then you're sort of seeing that top level list of folders and dashboards, you can delete folders, but you can't do much else with folders, other than travel to go kind of inside of them. So, you know, kind of doing anything with folders requires multiple clicks and sort of multiple levels down into the information architecture as a whole. And then once you get into the folder, we have sort of tabs that are doing a couple of things. Some of the tabs are allowing you to take actions, such as set permissions or adjust settings, and other tabs actually just hold content. And I think that this got a little bit muddied with the recent introduction of library panels. And one of the things that is going to happen as we kind of keep growing our I guess, pieces of reusable content, is that we can't just keep stacking tabs the whole way across the screen. And so we kind of have to come up with a better way of storing and managing things, and maybe kind of cleaning up that navigation to reduce our clicks. The other thing we want to do is make sure that all of these sort of pieces of content are, you know, it's clear that they are treated consistently. So whatever you can do from a folder view with a dashboard, you should also generally be able to do with a library panel, for example. And then we also have, I don't think it's sort of like officially out, but we do have an upcoming piece of content called a library variable, which is going to be basically a template variable that can be reused across dashboards. So very early days for that one. I don't have a sneak peek of it, but we do have to kind of come up with a place to put this that makes sense and allows you to do things like we do today with library panels, such as set permissions and organize and manage that. But above all, really what I want to make sure is that any changes that we make to how we're navigating within folders and managing folders, that we don't break anything that's currently working well for our current users. So that is why today what I'm going to do is kind of show off a few high-level design ideas. As with the query builder updates that Patrick showed, it's still pretty early days right now. So I'm going to gather a little bit of feedback, but in particular, what I'm really looking for is for people who are willing to spend 30 minutes with me and either show me or tell me how you're working with folders today, and maybe provide some more detailed feedback as my designs kind of grow and as we continue to kind of develop this feature. So this is how you can reach me, and I'll come back to this after I show the designs, but you can email me. You can reach me on our public Slack at Amy Super. But definitely, I'm really looking for some people to just spend a little bit of time with me and give me a better idea of kind of what your folder structures look like today, so that we can make sure that we're optimizing the experience for you. So before I get into the designs, are there any questions about what I'm going to cover or what we're looking to do here? All right, cool. So let's look at designs. So I'm actually going to start out here, which is, so from a general interaction point of view, so this doesn't look too much different from what you're accustomed to seeing today in its sort of high-level elements. One of the things that I wanted to do, so today we have 3 buttons across the top here. We have new folder, import, and new dashboard. But import is really just creating a new dashboard from an import action. So I just wanted to kind of collapse those down into one button because we're going to need that space for some other stuff, as you'll see a little bit later. The other thing that you'll notice is a little bit different is that we're coming in and these folders are collapsed. And you can see that this is sort of the start of a tree type structure. And one of the things that I am thinking that we can show here would be just sort of a summary of what's contained in each folder. One of the things that I'll need to look at is whether or not this list is going to get too long, but I'd just like to give like a high level of whether or not a folder contains anything. Because today, for example, you can create a folder and have nothing in it, but there's no indication from this top level folder view that there's nothing there. And so you sort of go maybe on a little bit of a chase after your content if you have some empty folders. So, generally speaking, we're just going to click on the title to expand it. And again, we're now looking at, so instead of having this like tab structure across the top, we're now looking at, again, more of like a tree structure where dashboards, library panels, and the upcoming library variables are all going to be kind of together in the folder, which is really conceptually where they are anyway. We still show our tags with dashboards as we do today. And I'm exploring this sort of info column where we can show for a dashboard, for example, whatever has been put into the description field in the dashboard settings. For the variables and panels, sort of what their usage is. So with library panels today, if you click to view a library panel, at that point, then you get a list of all of the dashboards in which it is used. But you don't know until you sort of like go investigating. So I like the idea of providing just a little bit more context before you go to take any actions on this, kind of what the implications of your change might be. So for example, if you want to move it, which would maybe change the permissions or delete it, before you even take action, if that library panel is being used in, I don't know, 80 dashboards, then you might hesitate a little bit than if it's just used in one. And I think it would be helpful to show that here early on in the sort of navigation. Just like today, we would make a selection and then allow the sort of action buttons that appear today. So that's sort of a general view there. Before I move on to sort of the actions we take on folders and sort of our filtering, is there any feedback or any comments about this general layout and the general approach I'm going with the tree structure?
I'm curious about the library variable a little bit. it says that it's used in 2 dashboards and 3 panels. This might be a little outside what you're currently showing, but it's just curious, how are we envisioning that, you know, when you change it in one dashboard, will it change for all other dashboards? Will it be, you know, will the value be shared, or is it just values in that variable, so to say?
So I'm not completely familiar with how this is going to work yet, Marcus,
Okay.
but my understanding is that because it is a library element, that yes, the idea is that you update it once and it kind of pushes the changes everywhere, just like with a library panel today. So you update the library panel in one dashboard and then it will update it elsewhere. But if you don't want to, you would have the ability to sort of unlink it from that like parent element or from that, you know, that reused component. But that's my impression of it, but I don't want that to be a promise right now because like I said, we're still working on it and I'm not totally sure about that. But great question. Any other feedback or comments on this before I can move on?
So are we thinking that this will be able, or will we be able to nest this? So could we have another folder inside this? I know that this is a frequently asked question. Can we have nested folders?
It is a frequently asked question. There are some not small technical limitations for us on nesting. So right now, for my particular effort, that is not part of the scope right now. But I will say that the design I'm going for here, I think, could be expanded to support nesting. But we got to solve those technical problems before we can actually do that. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on then. So the next thing we're going to take a look at are the sort of folder actions. So you'll notice that I have these sort of little icons here. And, as I mentioned before, today we're using tabs to give you an opportunity to take action on things. So such as set the permissions or edit the name. And then delete is sort of like in multiple places. So I just wanted to, again, just like streamline things and make it easy from this folder view where you have the context of what you're looking at in the folder to take these actions. So for example, if I want to change the permissions, I would click this permissions lock button icon, and you can see that the sort of permission panel that we're accustomed to seeing in many places just expands down. And one of the reasons I really, kind of went for this approach is that I can see not only what I'm doing, but I can see everything that's going to be affected by that action. So today, when you leave the tab, maybe you forget what dashboards are in there. Maybe you forget what library panels are going to be affected. And so you're sort of making your decisions in a little bit of a vacuum. So that's one option here, is to use this sort of, expanding accordion in order to provide that. Likewise, if you wanted to change the settings, right now the settings tab is really just renaming and deleting. So this one's a lot easier. It's just a field that we can update, though there definitely are other ways that we could solve this particular problem that we've talked about on the team and I'm continuing to explore. And then lastly, with delete, so delete's a little different. It should be a modal, and here is why. This can be a very destructive action. You can blow away a lot of work by deleting this without being aware of what you've done. So I wanted to make sure that it sort of popped up in a little bit more of an interruptive manner. And I'm also hoping to kind of continue this list of what's in here, what's going to be affected. You can kind of see it under the modal, but I can't always guarantee where the scroll is going to be on the page when you do this. So that's why I'm providing that listing again. And then because alerts are managed in a little bit of a different way, I'm envisioning right now, though it doesn't show on the prototype, that the alerts would actually be a link, so that if you wanted to go see what's going on with these alerts, you could click that link and then kind of open a new tab and head over to your alerts management area. But again, this is still very early, but those are sort of the overall folder actions that I'm taking a look at. And I have a second version of this that I can show also, but first I want to gather feedback on this particular concept of expanding out the actions you can take on a folder level. Any feedback?
Yeah, I really like the way you're solving all those issues that you mentioned. The one concern I have is that right now there's a lot of things going on the screen at the exactly same time. And and I don't have the answer, to be honest, but I would maybe try to explore ways of making this visually less cluttered.
Mhm.
I think that as much as we're solving, I think, nicely a lot of problems, this view is no longer a simple overview that you can easily scan. So with a view like this, you would have to heavily rely on search, and maybe that's the case for our users. But even though all interactions and actions are quicker and simpler, I think it's harder to grasp what's going on the screen.
Okay. Yeah, that's good feedback. I mean, there definitely is, by collapsing the navigation down so that we're not going to different tabs and we're doing this all at once, that means we have to now do everything at once. So that's good feedback. I'll look at ways that I can kind of, I mean, maybe the actions kind of collapse down into, you know, a button like this one up here, where it's just in actions and you kind of, you know, instead of seeing all of these little icons, because that can also be problematic for keyboard navigation. If you think of someone like tabbing their way through this table, each of these little icons is another like tab, 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 you know, so that could definitely be a little bit problematic as well. Okay. And then I think I saw a comment in the chat also that the idea is to show a list of the resources that would be deleted in the modal and not just the sort of summary. I think that's also really good feedback. One of the things I would need to look at there is that if a folder contains too many things, or maybe not too many things, but if it contains a lot of things, I'll have to look at how to, again, use maybe some sort of collapsible, because if you have, you know, again, 80 dashboards in a folder, maybe that, you know, that could get a little unwieldy. But I think that to sort of come back to Diana's point of like, are people mostly using search, or, you know, how many things are in each people's folders? That's why I'm really hoping to get people to reach out to me so that I can, you know, learn a little bit more about like what your setup looks like, so that we can make these decisions better, so that I don't end up with, you know, a modal that scrolls off of the screen, for example, or maybe that's not really a problem. We don't need to worry about it. But the way that we'll get there is by me learning a little bit more about how you're using it today. So I'm going to move on. And like I said, I have a couple variations on these, but I'm not going to go too far into them today. But the other thing that I'm looking at is from a filter perspective. So now we're ignoring the table down here, and we're talking about this space up here. So once again, there are a lot of things you can do here, even today. So you can search, you can create new things, you can view it by a folder, you can view it as a list, you can sort it. Today we show that, you know, see the ones that have stars, see the ones that don't have stars, see the one, you know, filter by a specific tag. And so again, it sort of starts to get a little crazy in terms of the number of things that you can do, both from a visual perspective and from a keyboard navigation perspective. And so one of the things that I'm playing with is putting those filters into this sort of like top of the page but collapsed view. So what I'm showing here is that I've previously set filters where I'm only going to show dashboards, and I'm only going to show dashboards that do not have stars. And again, ignore the table down here. I didn't actually set the filter in my design here. So we're just going to focus on what happens up here, not on what the effects would be. So, you know, give you the ability to clear that right away, you know, sort of like a view all clear. You just want that to be like a really quick action. And then today, you know, I'm kind of looking at these like multi-level filters where, so today we really only have three sort of like criteria upon which you can filter. Whether or not, you know, what the tags are, whether or not it's starred, and actually we have two today, those two. And then I'm going to be adding what type is it? So is it a dashboard? Is it a library panel, for example? And so I was playing with this, and again, this is not this is an early prototype, so I'm not showing it step by step, but in this scenario, somebody has added that they only want to see a type of dashboard and that the starred is set to not starred. Once any more than one row is added, you would get your little trash can icon for deleting that row. And then you could always add another row and then get a clear all. Again, kind of looking at ways to streamline the initial view upon coming into this folder or this sort of folder management area without losing our functionality. So this needs some work, I know that, but I would love to hear what you think and where you think it needs work, because definitely still shaping this one in particular. Any feedback from the group on this one?
I have one very specific type of feedback.
Sure.
I hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Like one thing that caught my eye is it's visible right now, but the summary, the text summary next to hide filter options. There, yes, that one.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it feels like the filter key is a bit redundant, or it does, to me, it doesn't add anything. You could have just said like dashboards not starred or something like that. But I get that if we get more filter options, it might, you know, look very differently. But right now, so, when you're displaying a text summary, in this case, you could, I mean, I would expect it to see like dashboards that are not starred or something like that. Actually, in proper English, you could do that now, but I don't know if that's possible in the future. So just that, you know, how you show the current selected, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's great feedback. And I admit that I kind of hesitated on this one personally as well, because again, kind of going back to my point of like, I would love to talk to people. What I'm not sure of is this too technical for some of our users who are only viewing dashboards and just want to filter their view to do this sort of like type equals and such like that, you know? So maybe it does need to be a little bit more plain language. You know, I think that really depends for me personally on who's using this heavily day to day. And that's something that I don't feel like I have a good sense for right this moment, is how heavily our not so technical users are doing things like filtering, or are they just going to search every single time, for example?
I think I would, in this case, again, because it's like a limited number of filter options, I would expect them to be like in a more quick access, quick actions view, because, you know, just click, I want to see all the starred ones or not, and what type I want to see. I guess this, you know, encourages me to go into like a filter mindset. Okay, now I'm going to write a filter for all the dashboards I want to see. And I think it has to motivate, you know, I need to build a really complicated filter for me to feel like it's worth it in a way. So I guess my follow-up question, are we looking to add more filter options for dashboards, or is there realistically not going to be more than 2-3 of them?
Right now, I don't think we're adding more, but that doesn't mean they won't come up in the future. But let me show you one of my other explorations that is much, much earlier in life that might address some of your questions or your concerns about this one, because it doesn't have to be laid out just like this, but I think it kind of goes to the point that you're making here. So in this one, my sort of filter, you know, I just have the summary that I have 2 filters set. So rather than saying like filter type equals, et cetera, I'm just sort of saying like, hey, this is a filtered view. You're not seeing everything. And I'm kind of, again, I don't love the layout of this in particular, but this is a little bit more of like an e-commerce looking filter, where it's just these very quick, like, these, you can filter by type, by start, or by tags, and these are your options. So what are your thoughts on that, sort of from that perspective of like, I just want to come in here quickly and like do it and not like build a filter?
I like this option better. I can't tell you exactly why. It just feels snappier, or I don't know. It's still, I'm guessing it's still the same amount of button clicks, but I guess my spontaneous reaction is that this feels faster. Or
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely less cognitive load to use something like that. And now it's my gut feeling, but that is something we have to get feedback on or research a bit. But when people look for dashboards, I don't think they're looking to build another query to find the dashboard. They want to do it super quick and super effectively. So I think those filters are way more straightforward than the previous solution.
Okay. Yeah, that's all great feedback. What about the sort of like right-hand drawer opening up versus putting this type of element in like I could put that in an accordion over here. So similar way to get there as my last option. So rather than in a drawer, have it sort of push the rest of this content down the screen, but have it be these really quick, easy checkboxes and switches. Did I lose you all on that question? I feel like that was sort of a convoluted way to ask.
No, I think that is a new like the drawer used in that way is a new pattern that we would introduce. And I'm not sure whether with only those few options, it's not an overkill, to be honest. And actually having this expandable in some way at the top of the list of dashboards would be probably a bit better, but still gut feeling.
Yeah.
My initial reaction when you if you go back, it close to pane, and
Maybe.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
There. My initial thought was that when you click show filter, since it's like a little arrow there, that it would actually expand horizontally so that it will show it like a toolbar or something like that. So it's horizontally next to view and sort instead.
I see. Yeah, that is a little misleading, isn't it? This little arrow kind of pointing to this big empty space. It makes you think something's going to come in over here. That's a good point. The other thing too is that I have been thinking that as a drawer, this sort of like big element, it just feels a little heavy-handed to me for what these interactions are. It feels like I should be doing a lot more here or reading a lot more here than just sort of hitting these filters. It is sort of, again, to sort of Diana's point, my gut feeling. Which is why I didn't show this first, because I think that what I don't like about it is the drawer itself. So, okay, that's great feedback. Any other comments on sort of filter interactions as a whole?
Yeah.
What you could potentially do for like try to optimize for the filtering is like look for different type of components, and like see like the best case scenario depending. And choose from one or two components. Like, for example, in this case, you have the tags listed vertically, right? And that tag list can grow pretty much indefinitely. But you could potentially show like an autocomplete version where as soon as you start typing, you have the name of the tag and use like pretty much a different type of component. That will make it, I guess, just a bit easier to the eye and not having to read that much. And Diana just said something. I'm not going to give more thoughts or to say what you just wrote.
Yeah, just sorry, didn't want to interrupt you. That's why I wrote it, not to forget. Yeah, that when looking at this and thinking about this, I would optimize interactions and the interface for time to dashboard KPI in a way.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. And Patrick, you were starting to say something as well?
Yeah. My thoughts is just that this is something that will show up more and more in different places. So basically, this sort of filtering is in a project I'm working on. It exists in some of the cloud projects. So yes, as long as we sort of get some sort of a good aligned solution, I guess. I mean, different cases might have some differences, but at least how we treat filtering, especially on type, maybe, or start and so forth. And another thought is if tag filtering can sort of become a part of the search input. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but or having a more advanced search, so you sort of can add more things
Right.
to it.
Yeah, that's something that I will say that I have put all of these types of content into one page and put a search bar over the top of all of it without yet understanding sort of the scope of the engineering effort to search across multiple types. It doesn't sound horribly difficult, but I think there are a couple of things that will need to be solved to make that happen. So that's something I will definitely take note of when it's time for me to start having those conversations of not just, you know, hey, is it okay, you know, can we search all of this stuff, but also like, now what else can we do now that this is all available from one view? I think it really opens up a lot of great possibilities for navigation within your lists of content. I just want to be careful because I don't want to make any engineers cry.
Only happy tears.
I hope so. Okay, great. So just a few minutes left. Any other thoughts on sort of filters, search, combined view? So I just want to put in one more plug for, let me know if you want to look at these more in depth. Let me know if you want to show me how things are working or not working for you today. Definitely interested in hearing more so that we can make these decisions based on more than kind of our gut feelings and how we like, you know, how we like the looks of things, for example. So again, more than anything, I don't want to break anything that's working today. So in order to do that, I need to know what is working today. So definitely look forward to hearing back from people, and thanks everyone for your time today. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining. Again, this will be available on YouTube in the coming days, so stay tuned. And don't forget to join us for next month, where we're gonna see the backend squad. I'm not entirely sure what they will be talking about just yet, but we will announce it over the course of the next weeks. So stay tuned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.